The queen said, "Divorce my daughter, human." But she refused to release me. Kalen Reese was not just another soldier. He was one of the last surviving warriors from Earth. A place so distant from the stars, few knew much about it. The Varnese Empire, where he had found himself, was a massive and powerful civilization, a mix of countless alien races, ruled by a queen whose power was absolute. Kalen had come here as a part of an alliance that seemed like a dream come true, an Earth-human soldier, working with alien forces to bring peace to troubled parts of the galaxy. But now, things had changed, and Kalen's life was about to be torn apart. Kalen's wife, Princess Alara, was the daughter of Queen Nakar, the most feared and revered ruler in the galaxy. Alara was strong, compassionate, and intelligent. She had a beauty that was unmatched even in the alien world, with her long silver hair and eyes that sparkled like stars. Alara had always stood up for what she believed in, and she had made it clear that Kalen, a human, was not just some foreigner in her life. He was her husband, her equal. But in this empire, love was complicated. The Varnese Empire's people were proud and ancient, and the queen was its ruler, a figure who had reigned for centuries with iron fists. Her power came from her bloodline and her ruthlessness. She believed in the purity of her race, and a human marrying her daughter was something she could never accept. Kalen's very presence in the royal family was an insult to her, a challenge to her authority and her empire's centuries-old traditions. The queen had tried to have Alara annul her marriage from the start, but Alara refused to back down, even though the pressure from her mother grew stronger by the day. On that particular day, as Kalen sat with Alara in the royal garden, surrounded by blooming alien flowers and towering stone structures, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had learned to fight battles with weapons, but this was a fight he wasn't sure he could win. Alara's mother had never spoken to him directly, but everyone in the palace knew the queen's thoughts on the matter. "You know she's going to make her move soon," Alara said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the two moons of Varnese rose against a pink sky. "She can't stand that I've married you, Kalen." Kalen nodded, his face hardening. "I know, I've seen the way she looks at me. Like I'm a threat to everything she's built. I wish she would just see us for what we are," Alara continued, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I've told her time and again that you're not just a human, you're a warrior, you're strong. You're one of the bravest men I've ever met." Kalen smiled, but there was little warmth in it. "I'm starting to think she'll never see me that way, not unless I'm gone. She's already told me I'm not welcome here, told me I was a mistake, a symbol of weakness." "Don't say that," Alara whispered, reaching out to take his hand. "You're not a symbol of weakness, you're a symbol of change, of hope." But despite her words, Alara knew that the queen's plans had already begun to take shape. The queen was not just upset with Kalen's presence, she was furious that her daughter had defied her. In the Varnese Empire, family was everything, and disobedience was a crime. No one challenged the queen's authority and survived. And Alara knew that if she stood by Kalen, she would be putting herself at odds with the most powerful woman in the galaxy. That evening, as they sat together in their chambers, the air was thick with tension. Suddenly the door opened, and a servant stepped inside, bowing low. "Your Highness, the Queen demands your presence immediately." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this, but the reality of it was still overwhelming. She turned to Kalen, who stood up immediately, his face filled with determination. "I'll go with you," Kalen said, his voice firm. "If your mother has something to say, I'll face her head-on." "No, Kalen," Alara replied, shaking her head. "Stay here. I don't want you to be dragged into this any more than you already are." But Kalen was already walking towards the door. "I'm not going to run, Alara, not from her, not from anyone." With that, they walked together down the long corridors of the royal palace, the sounds of their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As they entered the grand throne room, Kalen's gaze fell upon the queen. She sat upon her golden throne, her cold eyes staring down at them. Her expression was a mask of authority, but beneath it there was a flicker of something else, anger, perhaps fear. "You've come," the queen said, her voice cold and filled with disdain. "I was beginning to think you had finally come to your senses, daughter." Alara stood tall, her back straight. "I will not leave my husband, mother. I will not divorce Kalen." The queen's face twisted in anger. "You have no right to disobey me, Alara. This is not just about you. This is about the future of our empire, a future that is in jeopardy because of your foolishness. A human does not belong here." Your marriage to him is an embarrassment to this family. Kaelin stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. I don't care what you think, Queen Nakar. I love your daughter, and I'm not going anywhere. You will be gone one way or another, the queen snapped, standing from her throne. Her voice grew louder, more menacing. I will make sure of it. Alara's eyes flashed with fury. You can't control me anymore. I'm not a child to be manipulated, mother. The queen's gaze turned icy. You are my daughter, and I will do whatever it takes to protect this empire, even if that means destroying the very thing you love. Kaelin and Alara exchanged a look, both knowing the queen's threats were not empty. This was the moment when everything would change. Alara could feel the weight of her mother's power pressing down on them both, but she refused to let go of Kaelin. She knew that if she did, everything they had fought for would be lost. I will never leave him, Alara declared, her voice firm and unyielding. You can't break us. The queen's lips curled into a cruel smile. We shall see about that. With those words, the queen dismissed them, her mind already set on how to rid herself of the human soldier once and for all. As Kaelin and Alara left the throne room, both knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The days that followed were tense and filled with uncertainty. Kaelin's place in the royal palace became more dangerous with each passing hour. The queen's spies were everywhere, and rumors spread quickly. Alara, despite her defiance, knew that her mother's wrath was unstoppable. But as Kaelin looked at her, he saw a spark in her eyes, a fire that refused to be extinguished. They would face whatever came next together. Kaelin stood in the quiet hallway of the royal palace, his hand resting on the cool stone wall. The echoes of his footsteps seemed to follow him as he walked, the weight of the queen's words still heavy in his mind. You will be gone one way or another. Her voice echoed in his thoughts like a threat, reminding him of the power she held. But Kaelin wasn't afraid. No, he wasn't afraid of her power. What scared him was losing Alara. Alara's words earlier that day had stayed with him. I will not leave my husband. I will not divorce Kaelin. He admired her for standing up to her mother, but he knew the consequences of defying the queen. The queen didn't just threaten with words, she followed through. Alara's rebellion was dangerous, and Kaelin knew that as long as they were together, they would both be targets. His mind was racing as he walked toward Alara's chambers. The heavy doors of her room stood before him, their intricate designs carved into the dark wood. The guards, who had always been kind to him, stood silent as he approached. Kaelin gave them a nod, and they stepped aside without a word. They knew what was happening, and while they couldn't openly side with him, they understood the situation. He had seen them look at him with quiet sympathy in the past, but now their expressions were grave. Inside the room, Alara was sitting at the window, her back to him. She was staring out at the dark sky, the twin moons of Varnes casting a soft glow over the landscape. Her long silver hair shimmered in the moonlight, and Kaelin could see her shoulders rise and fall with a heavy sigh. She had been strong all day, but he knew she was struggling. They both were. Alara, Kaelin called softly, stepping into the room. She turned, a small smile tugging at her lips. I knew you'd come. Her voice was calm, but there was a tremor in it that she couldn't hide. Kaelin walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the window seat. We can't keep doing this, he said, his voice filled with concern. You're putting yourself in danger by refusing to divorce me. I won't, she replied firmly, her eyes locking with his. I love you, Kaelin. I will not let my mother tear us apart. No matter what she does, I'll stand by you. Kaelin reached for her hand, holding it gently. I know you love me, Alara, but your mother is not someone to take lightly. She has more power than anyone in this entire empire. She's been ruling for centuries, and she won't hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in her way. Alara's eyes softened as she squeezed his hand. I know her power, but she's not invincible, Kaelin. She might be the queen, but she's human, just like the rest of us. She has weaknesses. Kaelin raised an eyebrow. And what weaknesses are those? Alara stood up, her eyes distant as she paced the room. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to stand by and let her control me. She may be my mother, but that doesn't mean she knows what's best for me. She doesn't understand what we have. She'll never understand. Kaelin watched her as she moved around the room, the fire in her eyes burning brighter. He admired her strength, but he was also worried. The queen wasn't someone you could challenge without consequences. Alara didn't know what she was up against, but there was no stopping her now. He knew that, and perhaps deep down he admired her for it. I'll support you, Kaelin said, standing up and walking toward her. But we need a plan, a real plan. If we're going to stay together, we can't keep waiting for her to make the next move. We need to make ours first. Alara nodded, her expression serious now. You're right, we need to act before she can tear us apart. The next few days were filled with tension as the Queen's soldiers watched them closely. Kalen could feel their eyes on him wherever he went. They were always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for him to slip up. He had trained for battles, fought wars across the stars, but this was different. This wasn't a war he could fight with weapons. This was a battle for his life, his love, and his future. Alara, too, felt the pressure mounting. She had been trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but every conversation, every glance, reminded her of the growing rift between her and her mother. The palace was no longer a place of peace for her. It had become a battlefield, one where she was torn between her duty to her family and her love for Kalen. But despite the constant pressure, Alara refused to back down. She spent hours in secret meetings with Kalen, discussing their next moves. They couldn't trust anyone in the palace, but they could trust each other. That was the only thing that mattered. One evening, as they sat in a hidden room deep within the palace, Alara's voice was quiet but determined. I've spoken with a few members of the council. They're not all loyal to my mother. Some of them see the flaws in her rule, and they're willing to help us. Kalen raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do you want me to do? I need you to speak to them, Alara said. Show them who you really are. Not just a human warrior, but a symbol of what this empire could become if it embraced change. If it accepted humans like you as equals, not as outsiders. Kalen felt the weight of her words. He had never seen himself as a symbol, just a soldier doing his duty. But if this was what it would take to secure their future, he would do it. He had already lost too much to turn back now. I'll do it, Kalen said, but we need to be careful. One wrong move and everything we've worked for could fall apart. Alara nodded. I know. But we have to try. We have no other choice. The following day, Kalen found himself standing before the Council of Elders, the highest authority after the Queen. The room was vast, its walls adorned with ancient tapestries and alien artifacts, reminders of the Empire's long and storied history. The council members sat in high-backed chairs, their eyes fixed on him as he stepped forward. You're brave to come here, human, one of the council members, a tall alien with golden scales, said with a sneer. But you're wasting your time. You'll never change anything in this empire. Kalen met his gaze, unflinching. Maybe not, but I don't believe that. I've seen what this empire can become. I've fought beside your people, and I've learned that your strength lies not in tradition, but in unity. Human and Varnies alike, we can stand together. The council members exchanged glances, some skeptical, others curious. But Kalen saw something shift in their eyes. Maybe it was the passion in his voice or the fire in his heart, but something had changed. We'll consider your words, another council member said, a younger alien with bright blue skin. But the Queen's influence runs deep. Even if we agree with you, it won't be easy to overturn her rule. Kalen nodded. I know, but I'm willing to fight for it. I'm willing to fight for Alara, for all of you. As he left the council chambers, Kalen felt a glimmer of hope. It was small, but it was there. The rebellion was growing. Slowly but surely, more and more people were beginning to see the truth. But the Queen wasn't finished yet. As Kalen made his way back to Alara's chambers, he knew that the real battle was just beginning. The Queen's power was vast, and she would stop at nothing to keep her empire under control. But Kalen and Alara had something she didn't: love and the courage to fight for it. And as Kalen entered the room, Alara's face lit up when she saw him, and for the first time in days, Kalen allowed himself to smile. He knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but they would face it together. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Kalen and Alara had made their decision. They would not back down, no matter the cost. The Queen's control over the empire was strong, but it was also fragile, and they were beginning to see cracks in the system. What Kalen hadn't expected was just how far-reaching the Queen's influence went. It wasn't just her soldiers who were loyal, it was the very fabric of the empire itself. The tension between them and the Queen's forces was palpable. Kalen could feel the eyes of the guards following him wherever he went. The whispers in the halls had turned into a low hum of suspicion. People no longer looked at him with curiosity. Now they looked at him with fear. He wasn't just the human who had married the princess anymore. He was the human who was threatening to tear apart everything the Queen had built. But Kalen wasn't intimidated. He had faced worse in the past. alien armies, dangerous missions, and treacherous enemies. The Queen's threats were no different. What bothered him, though, was the toll it was taking on Alara. She was trying to hold everything together, trying to balance her love for him with the reality of her position in the Empire. It was clear to Kaelin that the weight of her family's expectations was breaking her down, even if she refused to admit it. One evening, after another long day of meetings and planning, Kaelin sat across from Alara in their private chambers. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from the flickering flames of a small fire in the corner. Alara's face was pale, her eyes tired. She hadn't slept well for days, and it was beginning to show. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Alara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every day it feels like the walls are closing in on me. I want to fight for you, Kaelin, but I'm starting to think my mother will never allow it. She'll do anything to get rid of you." Kaelin leaned forward, reaching out to take her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Alara. I've seen it in you every day. You've stood up to your mother, and you've held this empire together longer than anyone else could have." "We'll find a way." Alara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm losing everything. My family, my future, my place in this empire. And for what? For you? For us? I don't know if it's worth it anymore." Kaelin squeezed her hand tighter. "It's worth it. Everything we've fought for, everything we've built, it's worth it. We'll find a way to make it through this, together." But even as he said those words, Kaelin knew how fragile their situation was. They were on the brink of something far greater than a simple family dispute. The Queen wasn't just trying to break them apart. She was trying to destroy everything that stood between her and total control of the Empire. And Kaelin, despite his determination, knew he couldn't fight her alone. He needed more allies, more support if they were going to stand a chance. The next morning, Kaelin and Alara met in secret with some of the council members who had shown interest in their cause. It wasn't easy to arrange these meetings, as trust was in short supply, but they had managed to gather a small group of dissenters who were willing to take a stand against the Queen. These council members were old, but they were wise, and they had seen the cracks in the Queen's rule. Some had even lost family members to the Queen's cruelty, but they had kept their heads down, hoping the storm would pass. Now they were ready to act. "You are not alone in this," one of the council members, an older alien with green scales and piercing yellow eyes, said. "Many of us have watched as the Queen has tightened her grip. She is weakening the Empire with her rule. If you can gather enough support, we may have a chance." Kaelin nodded, his heart lifting slightly. "How many are willing to help?" The council member hesitated, looking around the room to the others before speaking again. "It's not just about numbers, it's about timing. The Queen has many loyalists, but they are beginning to question her methods. If we act too soon, we will be crushed. But if we wait too long, we will lose the momentum." Kaelin's mind raced as he thought about their next move. "So, what do we do? How do we gain more support without making the Queen notice?" Another council member, a tall alien with silver skin, spoke up. "We need to start with the people. The Queen may have power over the military, but she doesn't have the same control over the people. We need to show them that there's a better way, a way that doesn't involve living in fear of her rule." Alara nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll begin by speaking to the public. We'll show them that there's hope for a future without fear." Kaelin knew that Alara's words were true, but he also knew how dangerous it would be. The people of the Empire had grown up under the Queen's rule, and many were afraid of what might happen if they spoke out. But it was their only option. If they didn't act now, they would lose everything. Over the next few weeks, Kaelin and Alara worked with the council members to spread their message. They met in secret, gathering small groups of citizens who were willing to listen. It wasn't easy. The Queen's spies were everywhere, and every word they spoke had to be carefully chosen. But the more they spoke, the more people began to listen. Slowly but surely, they started to build a network of supporters who believed in what they were trying to do. But as their network grew, so did the danger. The Queen was not one to be ignored, and it wasn't long before her spies discovered what they were doing. Kaelin could feel the tension in the air, a sense that something was about to break. He knew the Queen wouldn't let this go without a fight. One night, as Kaelin and Alara were returning to their chambers after another secret meeting, they were stopped by a group of royal guards. The leader of the guards, a tall alien with a scar across his face, stepped forward. "You've been warned," the guard said, his voice cold. You're causing trouble in the Empire. The Queen will not tolerate this any longer. Kalen stood his ground, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. I'm not the one causing trouble. Your Queen is the one tearing this Empire apart with her fear and cruelty. We're only trying to bring change. The guard's eyes narrowed. The Queen's word is law. You will not defy her. Alara stepped forward, her voice steady. We won't stop. We will fight for the future we believe in, and you can't stop us. The tension in the air was thick as the guards circled them. Kalen could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But Alara's strength, her unwavering determination, gave him the courage he needed to stand tall. They were not alone anymore. They had allies. They had hope. The guards hesitated for a moment, and then, with a final glare, they turned and walked away. But Kalen knew this was just the beginning. The Queen would come for them, and when she did, they would have to be ready. As the days passed, Kalen and Alara continued to gather more support, but the Queen's spies were closing in. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to a confrontation. The tension was unbearable. Kalen knew that soon they would face the Queen's wrath. But no matter what happened, he would stand by Alara, and together they would fight for the future they believed in. The tension in the air had never been thicker. Kalen could feel it pressing down on him every time he moved through the halls of the palace, every time he stepped outside, where the eyes of the Queen's loyalists followed his every move. The world around him had grown darker, more dangerous, and yet in the midst of it all there was a flicker of hope, however small it may seem. Hope that was powered by Alara's unshakable determination. For the past few weeks, they had worked tirelessly to rally the people, to show them that there was a way forward, one that didn't have to be ruled by fear, by the Queen's iron grip on the Empire. Every secret meeting, every whispered conversation had built their strength little by little. Yet, as much as their support grew, so did the danger. Kalen had known this would happen. He had always known the Queen would retaliate, and now the time had come. It started with a quiet knock on their door in the dead of night. Kalen's hand instinctively went to the blade at his side, but when Alara opened the door, there was no enemy waiting. Instead, it was a familiar face, a trusted ally from the council, one of the few who had risked their position to stand with them. "It's time," the council member said in a low, urgent voice, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "She knows. The Queen's spies have found out everything. You're being watched every second now. We need to move before it's too late." Kalen exchanged a glance with Alara. There was no time for hesitation. The walls were closing in on them, and they had to act now or risk losing everything. "Alara, we're ready. This is our chance," Kalen said, his voice firm. "We'll make our stand." Alara nodded, her expression set. She had been preparing for this moment for so long, and now that it was here, she was ready to fight for her future, for their future. Let's do it. The rebellion had started as a whisper, a secret few knew, but now it was about to become a loud roar. The streets of the capital would be the stage for the first real test of their cause. As Alara and Kalen gathered the small group of council allies, the plan began to unfold. They had a brief window of opportunity. The Queen was focused on an upcoming state event, and her forces would be distracted. If they were quick, they could strike when the Queen's attention was diverted. They moved in silence, their steps light but purposeful. As they navigated the palace's labyrinthine halls, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a razor's edge. One misstep, and the entire rebellion would be crushed before it even had a chance to breathe. But Alara was resolute. Her eyes burned with a determination that Kalen had come to admire more than anything else. She wasn't just fighting for her love for him, she was fighting for something bigger, for the future of the Empire. For the lives of everyone who had lived under the Queen's rule for so long. They reached the central chamber, where the council members had gathered in secret. The room was dimly lit, the shadows casting long, sharp lines across the faces of the people seated around the table. They were the ones who had agreed to help them, who had seen the Queen's cruelty firsthand, and knew that the Empire could not continue down the path it was on. "We don't have much time," one of the council members said, their voice trembling slightly. "The Queen's spies are everywhere. It's a miracle we've even made it this far." Alara stood at the head of the table, her posture straight, her voice strong. "We have to move now. The Queen will never accept change. She won't stop until she has destroyed everything that stands in her way, but we can still stop her. We can show the people that there is hope, that we don't have to live in fear anymore." Kalen stood beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. We have to be smart. The Queen's forces are too strong. We can't defeat her with force alone. We need to win the people over, show them that this empire is theirs, not just hers. Another council member spoke up. The people are scared, Alara. They've been under the Queen's rule for so long that they don't know how to fight back. We have to give them the courage to stand with us. Kalen looked around at the council, at the faces filled with fear but also determination. This was their moment. The rebellion wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone who had suffered under the Queen's reign. The empire needed change, and they were the ones who would bring it. We'll start with the speech, Kalen said. I'll go to the plaza. I'll speak to the people directly. I've seen the way they look at me. They want to believe in something better. They just need someone to show them the way. Alara's gaze softened as she looked at him. Be careful, Kalen. The Queen's spies are everywhere. If they see you, it could be the end. Kalen nodded, but he wasn't afraid. I fought worse than this. If we're going to win, it starts with the people. We can't let fear stop us. The plan was set. As Kalen prepared to leave, Alara caught his arm. She held him for a moment, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange of love and determination. They both knew what was at stake. I'll be with you, Alara said softly, in every step. Kalen smiled, though it was a somber one. We're in this together, Alara, always. He left the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The streets of the capital were bustling with activity, but Kalen's steps were steady. He had done this before, stood in front of crowds of soldiers, giving speeches, rallying them to battle. But this wasn't a battle of guns and swords. This was a battle of words, of hope, of something greater than himself. The weight of it pressed on him as he walked into the open square. When Kalen stepped into the plaza, the crowd grew quiet. He could feel their eyes on him, the uncertainty, the fear. But there was something else there too, something that gave him hope. Curiosity. They wanted to believe. People of the Empire, Kalen called out, his voice carrying across the plaza. I stand before you today not as a human soldier, but as someone who believes in you. I believe in this empire, and I believe in change. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising around him. Some faces were skeptical, others hopeful. Kalen continued, his words firm and clear. We've lived in fear for too long. We've allowed one person to dictate our lives, to control our future. But we don't have to live this way anymore. The Queen's rule has been one of fear and manipulation, but we can change that. We can be stronger than that. Kalen could see the reactions in the crowd. Some were still unsure, others were nodding in agreement. The tension in the air was thick, but it was beginning to shift. They were listening. We stand together, Kalen said, his voice growing stronger. Not as humans and aliens, but as one people. We are all part of this empire, and it is our right to decide our future. Not the Queen, not anyone else. We have the power. Together we can build a future where fear no longer holds us back. There was silence for a moment, and then slowly the crowd began to clap. It was quiet at first, hesitant, but then it grew louder, more certain. The people were starting to believe. They were starting to see the possibility of something more. Kalen's heart raced as he looked out at the growing crowd. This was only the beginning, but it was a powerful start. He knew the Queen wouldn't back down easily. She would retaliate, of course. But for the first time in a long while, Kalen felt like they had a real chance. The people were with them, and that made all the difference. The streets of the capital were filled with a new kind of energy. The crowd that had gathered in the plaza to listen to Kalen's speech had left with something different in their hearts. Hope. For the first time in years, they felt like they had a voice. They were no longer just subjects under the Queen's rule. They were citizens, part of something larger. They were ready to stand and fight for the future they believed in. But as Kalen returned to Alara's chambers, his heart was heavy with the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The Queen would not let this rebellion go unanswered. She had already shown how far she was willing to go to maintain her control, and now, with the people beginning to question her reign, Kalen knew she would do whatever it took to crush them. Alara, Kalen said, stepping into the room where she was waiting. Her eyes met his with a mixture of worry and hope. She had been standing at the window, watching the streets below, but now her gaze softened as she saw the look on his face. They're listening, Kalen said, trying to offer a reassuring smile, but he knew the battle was far from over. The people are beginning to see what we see. They want change. They want freedom. Alara nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes. It's not going to be easy, Kalen. We've only just begun to open their eyes. The Queen will never accept this. I know, Kaelin said, sitting down beside her. But we have to keep pushing. We have to keep showing them that there's a better way. We can't let her control us anymore. Alara's expression hardened. I'll never let her control me again, but I can't do it alone. Kaelin took her hand, squeezing it gently. You're not alone, Alara. We're in this together. We always have been. Just as the words left his lips, the door to the room burst open. A messenger, breathless and urgent, entered. Your Highness, Kaelin, the Queen has ordered her forces to move against you. The palace is on lockdown. She sent her elite soldiers to capture you. Alara stood up, her heart racing. We don't have much time. Kaelin's mind raced. They had known this moment would come, but to face it now, so soon, the Queen had finally made her move. He didn't hesitate. We need to go now. Without a word, Kaelin and Alara rushed out of the room, making their way through the palace. The sound of boots echoing on the stone floors filled the air as they sprinted through the halls, avoiding the royal guards who were surely on their way. The Queen's forces were vast, and there was no telling how many soldiers she had sent after them. Every step they took brought them closer to danger, but they couldn't stop. Not now. We need to get to the council, Kaelin said, his voice low but urgent. If we can reach them, we might be able to turn the tide. Alara nodded. We can't let them catch us, not now. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the main corridors where the guards were patrolling. The palace was a maze, and Kaelin knew it better than most. They had trained together, him and Alara, learning how to navigate the dangerous halls in secret. It was their only hope now. As they reached a hidden passage that led to the lower levels of the palace, Kaelin stopped. Alara, we can't go any further. They'll be waiting for us at the council chambers. We need to think this through. Alara's eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a spark of determination in them. What do we do now, Kaelin? Where do we go? We fight, he said, his voice filled with resolve. We stand our ground. They both knew what that meant. The Queen would never back down. And neither would they. It was time to make a final stand. They moved through the darkened halls, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath them. The palace was eerily quiet now, the air thick with tension. The Queen's soldiers were closing in, and Kaelin could feel their presence, like a shadow following them every step of the way. As they reached the palace gates, Kaelin stopped. Alara, listen to me. We can't keep running. If we do, we'll never be free. The people need to see us stand, not run. Alara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. You're right. We've come this far. We can't let her win. With that, they stepped into the open courtyard. Kaelin's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around, but the sight before him made his blood run cold. The Queen's soldiers were already there, waiting for them, dozens of them, armed and ready. Kaelin's hand went to his sword, his grip tight. But then something unexpected happened. From the shadows, a group of citizens emerged, their faces filled with defiance. They were the ones who had listened to Kaelin's speech, who had believed in the hope he had promised. They were ready to fight. Alara, Kaelin, one of them said, stepping forward. We're with you. Kaelin's heart lifted as he saw more people emerge from the shadows. The rebellion was no longer just a few scattered voices, it was a movement, and they were ready to fight for it. The Queen's soldiers hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by the sudden show of strength. But the moment of hesitation didn't last long. The Queen's elite forces advanced, their weapons drawn. Kaelin's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, but Alara stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. We will not back down. This is our fight now. The Empire belongs to the people, not to one person who seeks to control us all. The Queen's soldiers hesitated again, but the order was given. The battle began. Kaelin fought with all his strength, his years of training coming to the forefront as he clashed with the Queen's forces. His movements were fluid, his strikes precise. But even with the rebellion at their side, the Queen's soldiers were well-trained and relentless. Kaelin couldn't afford to hesitate for even a second. Alara, too, fought with the fury of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. She was fierce and determined, striking down any soldier who came too close. Her sword was an extension of herself, a symbol of her commitment to the cause. Despite their skill, the Queen's forces were too many. Kaelin could feel the tide turning against them. But then something unexpected happened. From the palace walls, other council members who had secretly supported them opened fire on the Queen's soldiers. The rebellion's numbers were growing. What had started as a small group of dissenters was now a full-scale uprising. The tide of the battle shifted, and the Queen's forces began to retreat. But even in the chaos, Kalen knew that this was only the beginning. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. As the last of the Queen's soldiers retreated, Kalen and Alara stood together, breathing heavily. They had done it. They had won, but at a great cost. The Empire had been shaken to its core, and now they would have to rebuild it. The fight for freedom wasn't over. There would be more battles to face, more struggles to endure. But for the first time, Kalen felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. The people were with them, and together they could create a new future, one where they could all live free from fear. Alara, Kalen said softly, turning to her. We did it. We really did it. Alara smiled, her eyes filled with both exhaustion and triumph. We did, and we'll keep fighting, Kalen, for our future, for the future of the Empire. And with that, they turned to face the horizon, ready for whatever the future held.